By the time I was told not to enter my own store through the front door, the damage had already been done. I didn't know that yet, but the betrayal had already spread. HR was inside. My regional manager was waiting. And the woman I had hired, trained, protected, and trusted was sitting in a corner telling everyone I was a criminal. I walked in through the back like a suspect being escorted to interrogation, coffee still warm in my hand, and sat across from people who suddenly looked at me like they didn't know me at all. Then the accusation landed. Theft. Harassment. Hostile work environment. Not whispered. Not implied. Typed. Documented. Formal. 3 pages of lies with dates, dollar amounts, and carefully chosen details meant to sound undeniable. Money missing from the register. Me yelling at her in front of customers. Me threatening her job. I watched the words rearrange my entire career in real time. And I understood something terrifying in that moment. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a disagreement. It was an execution. She had already told the story. Already decided who I was going to be. Already convinced people to believe her before I ever walked into that room. By the time HR showed up, my reputation was already dead. People I'd worked beside for years were nodding along to a version of me that didn't exist. Customers were being told I was dangerous. Coworkers were being asked to remember things that never happened. And the woman who wouldn't meet my eyes as the accusations were read out loud wasn't nervous, she was finished. Calm. Certain. Because she believed the story was airtight. That emotion would beat truth. That accusation would beat evidence. That once the lie was loud enough, it wouldn't matter what actually happened. She told everyone I was lying. She never expected the cameras to disagree. Patricia asked if I wanted to respond. I said yes. But I didn't defend myself emotionally. I asked for specifics. What dates was the money allegedly taken? She read them from the complaint. September 14th, September 18th, September 23rd. I pulled out my phone and opened my work schedule. I wasn't working September 18th. I was at our sister location covering for another manager who'd called in sick. Patricia made a note. What about the harassment incidents? She read the dates and descriptions. August 30th, yelled at Gabrielle in front of a customer for missing a sale. September 5th, berated her publicly for arriving late. September 12th, threatened her job during a staff meeting. I listened to each one. Then I said calmly that I'd need to review my records. But off the top of my head, I wasn't even in the store on September 5th. I was at a regional training seminar. 200 miles away. Patricia exchanged a glance with the HR rep. The HR rep said they'd be reviewing security footage. That this was a serious matter. That I was being placed on paid suspension while they investigated. I asked how long the investigation would take. They said at least a week. Maybe 2. I stood up. Asked if I could access my office to get my personal belongings. They said not yet. Everything needed to stay as it was. I walked out through the back entrance. Gabrielle still hadn't looked at me once. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home. Not crying. Not panicking. Just trying to understand what had just happened. Gabrielle and I had worked together for a year. I'd hired her when she was struggling to find work after moving to the area. I'd trained her on the register, on inventory systems, on how to handle difficult customers. I'd let her vent about her personal life during slow shifts. I'd given her extra hours when she needed money. I'd written her a glowing performance review 3 months ago. And now she was accusing me of theft and harassment. With specific dates. Specific amounts. Specific incidents detailed enough that HR was taking it seriously. I pulled out my phone and checked social media. Gabrielle had posted something 2 days ago. Vague but pointed. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. Grateful for friends who believe me when I speak my truth. 37 likes. 12 comments of support. People I worked with. People who shopped at the store. People who now thought I was the villain in a story I didn't even know was being written. I realized then that the HR meeting wasn't the beginning. It was the finale. Gabrielle had been telling this story for days. Maybe weeks. Building a narrative. Gathering sympathy. Positioning herself as the victim. And by the time I walked into that office, my reputation had already been destroyed. Let me tell you who I actually am. My name is Maya Torres. I'm 29 years old. I've worked in retail management for 7 years. I started as a sales associate at 16, worked my way through every position, and became a store manager at 26. I'm good at my job. My stores consistently hit sales targets. My teams have low turnover. My customer satisfaction scores are always in the top 10% of the region. I'd managed the boutique for 3 years. Built a team. Created systems. Turned it into one of the most profitable locations in our district. And I'd done it by being fair. Consistent. Supportive. I didn't yell at employees. I didn't steal. I didn't create hostile environments. Those accusations weren't just false. They were the opposite of who I'd worked years to become. Gabrielle knew that. She'd told me once, during a late-night inventory session, that I was the best manager she'd ever had. That I made her feel valued. That she was grateful to work somewhere she didn't dread coming to. I'd believed her. Trusted her. Considered her part of my core team. Now I understood. Those conversations hadn't been bonding. They'd been research. She'd been learning exactly what mattered to me, what I valued, what would hurt most if weaponized. And she'd used it all. The first thing I did when I got home was document everything. Not emotionally. Systematically. I pulled my work schedule for the past 3 months. Highlighted every day I wasn't in the store. Cross-referenced it with the dates Gabrielle had listed in her complaint. 2 of the alleged theft dates, I wasn't working. 1 of the harassment dates, I was at a training seminar with sign-in logs and hotel receipts. Then I pulled the register reconciliation reports. Every manager had to balance the register at the end of their shift. Sign off on discrepancies. Note any shortages. I'd been meticulous about this for years. I went through every report from the past month. There were shortages. Small ones. $20 here. $15 there. But they'd occurred on days when Gabrielle had been the closing associate. When she'd been responsible for final counts. I took screenshots of everything. Organized them by date. Created a timeline that showed not just where I was, but where the money actually went missing. Then I did something else. I requested my own copy of the security footage. Not through Patricia. Not through local HR, directly from corporate. I sent an email to the security operations team. Explained that I was under investigation. That I needed footage for specific dates and times to defend myself. That this was within my rights as an employee facing disciplinary action. They responded within 3 hours. Footage would be available for review within 48 hours. While I waited, I started hearing things. Through friends. Through former coworkers. Through people who still worked at the store. Gabrielle had been talking. Not just to HR. To everyone. She'd told the assistant manager that I'd been skimming from the register for months. Told another sales associate that I'd threatened to fire her if she reported it. Told a customer, someone who came in regularly, that she was scared to come to work because of how I treated her. The story had spread through 3 store locations. Through our district. Through social media circles connected to the boutique. And with each retelling, it got worse. More detailed. More sympathetic. More damning. I wasn't just accused anymore. I was guilty. In the court of workplace opinion, the verdict had already been delivered. People I'd worked with for years stopped responding to my texts. A vendor I'd built a relationship with over 3 years sent a cold, formal email saying they'd be working with new management moving forward. A friend who worked at a competing store called to ask, gently, if I was okay. If the rumors were true. If I needed help. I told her they weren't true. That I had proof. She said she believed me. But her voice carried doubt. Because belief without evidence is just politeness. And politeness doesn't rebuild reputation. The security footage arrived on day 3. I watched it alone in my apartment. Started with September 14th. The first alleged theft date. I wasn't even on camera that day until 2 p.m. The missing money, according to register logs, had been taken during the morning shift. I watched Gabrielle work the register. Watched her process transactions. Watched her, at 11:23 a.m., void a cash sale. Pocket the bills. And close the drawer like nothing had happened. I rewound it. Watched it again. The movement was quick but visible. She'd done it before. She knew exactly how to make it look like a transaction error. I moved to September 18th. The day I wasn't even working. Gabrielle was there. Alone at the register for the first 2 hours of her shift. At 10:47 a.m., another void. Another pocketed bill. Same pattern. Then I moved to the harassment allegations. August 30th. The day I allegedly yelled at her in front of a customer. The footage showed me calmly discussing a display with her. No raised voices. No customer present during the conversation. She'd fabricated it entirely. September 5th. The day I was at a training seminar. The footage showed Gabrielle working her shift normally. No me. No argument. No incident. September 12th. The staff meeting where I allegedly threatened her. The footage showed a routine meeting. Me going over sales goals. Gabrielle nodding along. Taking notes. No conflict. No threats. Every single accusation was a lie. Documented. Timestamped. Undeniable. I didn't call Patricia. I didn't call local HR. I emailed corporate legal directly. Attached the footage. Attached my work schedule showing I wasn't present on the days alleged. Attached register reconciliation reports showing shortages occurred on Gabrielle's shifts. And I attached one more thing. Screenshots of text messages between Gabrielle and another employee. Messages I'd been forwarded by someone who was starting to doubt Gabrielle's story. In the texts sent the day before she filed the complaint, Gabrielle had written, "I need people to back me up tomorrow. Just say you saw her yelling at me. You don't have to give details. Just enough to make it believable." The other employee had responded, "I don't know. That feels wrong." Gabrielle had replied, "She's been horrible to both of us. This is how we fix it." The employee had eventually agreed. Reluctantly. But that reluctance had turned to guilt. And guilt had led to screenshots. Which led to evidence. Corporate legal responded within 6 hours. They were escalating the investigation. Gabrielle would be called in for questioning the next day. I was to remain on suspension but should prepare to return within the week. They thanked me for my thoroughness. Then they asked one question that changed everything. "Do you want to press charges?" I thought about that question for a long time. Pressing charges meant making this public. Criminal. It meant Gabrielle wouldn't just lose her job. She'd face legal consequences for theft and potentially for filing a false report. It meant dragging this out for months. Court dates. Testimony. Reliving the betrayal over and over. But not pressing charges meant she'd walk away. Get fired, maybe. But move on to another job. Another manager. Another opportunity to do exactly what she'd done to me. I called a lawyer. Explained everything. She reviewed the footage, the texts, the timeline. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. You have a strong case for defamation. She made specific, false statements that damaged your reputation. You have proof they were false. And you have evidence she knew they were false when she made them. That's textbook defamation. I asked what that would look like. She said we'd file a civil suit. Seek damages for lost income, emotional distress, and reputational harm. It wouldn't be fast. But it would be public. And it would create a legal record that followed Gabrielle. I told her to draft the paperwork. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I wanted a record that couldn't be erased or rewritten. A record that said, clearly and permanently, that Gabrielle had lied. And that lying had consequences. Corporate called Gabrielle in for questioning the next morning. I wasn't there. But I heard about it afterward. From Patricia, who'd been required to attend. From the HR rep, who later apologized to me directly. From corporate legal, who walked me through what had happened step by step. They'd shown Gabrielle the security footage. The clips of her pocketing cash. The dates and times. The voids that matched the missing amounts exactly. At first, she'd denied it. Said the cameras must be wrong. That timestamps could be manipulated. That I must have edited the footage somehow. Corporate explained that footage was stored on tamper-proof servers. That access was logged. That every frame had metadata proving when it was recorded and who accessed it. Gabrielle tried a different approach. Said she'd made mistakes. That she'd been under stress. That she'd panicked and blamed me because she was scared of getting fired. But that didn't explain the harassment allegations. The specific, detailed lies about incidents that never happened. The coordinated false testimony from other employees. Corporate asked her directly. Why did you accuse Maya of things you knew didn't happen? Gabrielle didn't answer. She just cried. And when crying didn't work, she walked out. By the end of the day, she was terminated. Effective immediately. Banned from all company locations. Flagged in the system as non-rehirable. Corporate offered me my job back with an apology. Back pay for the suspension. A letter acknowledging that the investigation had cleared me of all allegations. But I didn't accept immediately. Because the damage wasn't just professional. It was reputational. People still believed Gabrielle's story. Coworkers who'd heard the rumors but not the resolution. Customers who'd seen the social media posts. Vendors who'd distanced themselves. My name had been dragged through weeks of gossip. And a quiet internal resolution wouldn't fix that. I told corporate I wanted 3 things. First, a written apology from the company acknowledging the false accusations and the harm they'd caused. Second, mandatory staff meetings at all locations where the truth would be explained and relevant footage shown to prove the allegations were false. Third, a formal reference letter clearing my name for any future employment, explicitly stating that I was falsely accused and fully exonerated. Corporate hesitated. Said showing footage to staff was unusual. That it might create privacy concerns. I said Gabrielle had already made this public. That her lies had been broadcast to everyone I worked with. That clearing my name required the same audience. They agreed. Within a week, every location in the district held a mandatory meeting. Patricia explained what had happened. Showed clips of the footage. Read the timeline proving I wasn't even present for the alleged incidents. Some employees looked shocked. Others looked ashamed. A few apologized to me directly afterward. But most just stayed quiet. Because admitting they'd believed a lie meant admitting they'd participated in destroying someone's reputation without asking questions. The civil defamation lawsuit moved slowly. My attorney filed the complaint 3 weeks after my reinstatement. We sued Gabrielle for damages including lost income during suspension, emotional distress, and reputational harm. We attached the security footage, the text messages coordinating false testimony, and statements from corporate confirming the allegations were false. Gabrielle's attorney tried to settle immediately. Offered a small amount. A mutual non-disparagement agreement. A quiet resolution. My attorney said no. We weren't interested in quiet. We wanted a judgment. A legal finding that what Gabrielle had done was defamation. That her statements were false, that she knew they were false, and that she'd made them with intent to harm. We wanted it on the record. Permanently. Gabrielle's defense was weak. Her attorney argued that she'd been stressed. That she'd made mistakes. That she hadn't intended to cause harm. But intent is hard to argue when you have text messages saying, "Just say you saw her yelling at me, and this is how we fix it." Intent was documented. Filed. Undeniable. The case took 6 months. But eventually, we won. The court found in my favor. Awarded damages. And issued a judgment stating clearly that Gabrielle had made false statements with knowledge of their falsity. That judgment became part of public record. Searchable. Permanent. Attached to her name forever. Returning to work was strange. I walked into the same store I'd managed for 3 years. Same layout. Same inventory systems. Same routines. But everything felt different. The team was smaller. 2 employees had left during my suspension. 1 had been let go for participating in the false testimony. The assistant manager had been demoted for failing to question the allegations before they escalated. And the customers who used to greet me warmly now approached cautiously. Some apologized. Said they'd heard rumors but didn't know the truth. Others avoided eye contact. Embarrassed, maybe, that they'd believed gossip without waiting for facts. I didn't hold it against them. Not personally. But I learned something important. Reputation isn't built on truth. It's built on perception. And perception, once damaged, doesn't heal just because the truth comes out. It heals slowly. Through consistency. Through time. Through proving, day after day, that the false version of you isn't real. I spent the next 6 months doing exactly that. Showing up. Delivering results. Treating people fairly. Building back what Gabrielle had tried to destroy. Not through speeches or explanations. Just through work. Steady. Boring. Reliable. And eventually, the whispers stopped. The cautious glances faded. The reputation rebuilt itself. Not because people forgot. But because the evidence of who I actually was became louder than the lies about who I wasn't. I learned later what had motivated Gabrielle. Not from her. We never spoke again. But from people who'd known her before she worked for me. She'd had a pattern. 3 previous jobs. 3 previous managers who'd either fired her or forced her to resign. Each time, she'd claimed mistreatment. Filed complaints. Spread rumors. Positioned herself as the victim. But she'd never faced consequences. No one had fought back. No one had documented. No one had pressed charges. So she'd moved on. Found another job. Done it again. I was supposed to be the 4th. The difference was documentation. I'd kept meticulous records. I'd known where the security footage was stored. I'd requested evidence instead of just defending myself emotionally. And I'd been willing to take it beyond the workplace. To make it legal. Public. Permanent. That's what stopped the pattern. Not because Gabrielle suddenly developed a conscience. But because the consequences finally outweighed the benefit. She couldn't move to another job and do it again. Because now there was a court judgment. A public record. Something that would come up in background checks and reference calls. Her ability to weaponize false accusations had been neutralized. Not through forgiveness. Through documentation. 3 years later, I'm still managing the boutique. We've expanded. Hired new staff. Built a culture where people feel comfortable raising real concerns without fear of retaliation. But I've also built systems. Every shift gets documented. Every transaction reconciled. Every conversation about performance issues is followed by an email summary. Not because I distrust my team, but because I learned that trust without verification is just vulnerability. And vulnerability, in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon. I heard through former coworkers that Gabrielle moved to a different city. Tried to get back into retail. But the background checks kept surfacing the judgment. The defamation case. The theft. No one wanted to hire someone with that record. Last I heard, she'd left retail entirely. I don't know where she ended up. And I don't care. Because my focus isn't on what happened to her. It's on what I built after. The reputation I restored. The systems I created. The lesson I carry. That silence isn't weakness when it's strategic. That documentation isn't paranoia when it's consistent. And that clearing your name isn't about being believed. It's about having proof that can't be denied. Gabrielle told everyone I was lying. The security footage proved her wrong. And that footage, those records, that timeline, did more than clear my name. It taught me that truth without evidence is just an opinion. But evidence without emotion is fact. And facts, eventually, win. Looking back, I understand why Gabrielle chose me. I was kind. Trusting. Someone who gave second chances and believed in people's potential. Someone who wouldn't immediately suspect betrayal from a person I'd helped. Those qualities made me a good manager. They also made me an easy target. Because people like Gabrielle don't attack the suspicious. They attack the trusting. They weaponize kindness. They turn generosity into guilt and support into obligation. And they count on you being too hurt, too shocked, too embarrassed to fight back. What Gabrielle didn't count on was structure. Systems. Documentation that existed whether I trusted her or not. She thought I kept records to manage the store. She didn't realize I was also protecting myself. Not from her specifically. From anyone who might decide that lying was easier than accountability. That's the lesson I carry now. In every job. Every relationship. Every situation where my reputation might be on the line. Document everything. Not because you expect betrayal. But because if betrayal comes, documentation is the only thing that separates your word from theirs. And in a world that runs on proof, your word isn't enough. The footage was enough. The timeline was enough. The text messages were enough. And together, they were undeniable. I think about the employees who backed Gabrielle's story. The ones who agreed to say they'd witnessed things they hadn't. Who sent texts saying they'd corroborate lies. Who participated in destroying my reputation because someone asked them to. Some did it out of fear. Worried that refusing would make them Gabrielle's next target. Others did it out of misplaced loyalty. Believing that supporting a coworker meant believing them without question. But a few did it because it was easy. Because going along with the crowd required less courage than asking for proof. Those people faced consequences too. Not legal ones. But professional ones. When the truth came out, when the footage showed they'd lied, their credibility evaporated. They stayed employed. But they were never trusted the same way again. Because once you're willing to lie for someone else's benefit, people assume you'll lie for your own. That's the hidden cost of participating in false accusations. Even if you're not the one who started them. Even if you're just backing someone else's story. When the story collapses, you collapse with it. Your reputation becomes collateral damage. And unlike Gabrielle, who made a choice, you made a choice to enable. Which is almost worse. The social media posts never came down. Gabrielle's vague references to toxic management and speaking her truth are still there. Liked. Shared. Commented on by people who never learned the outcome. I thought about asking her to delete them. Thought about sending a formal request through my attorney. But I decided against it. Because those posts, frozen in time, are evidence too. Evidence of how quickly lies spread. How eagerly people consume narratives that fit their biases. How little proof is required when the story is compelling enough. Leaving them up reminds me. And reminds anyone who finds them and digs deeper. Who searches my name and finds the lawsuit. Who reads the judgment and sees the timeline. That accusations are easy. Proof is hard. And social media immortalizes both. So the posts stay. Not as a wound. As a record. Of what was claimed. And what was proven false. And anyone who cares enough to look beyond the surface will see both. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if someone has accused you of something you didn't do, if your reputation is being destroyed by lies, I want you to know this. Don't defend yourself with words. Defend yourself with evidence. Pull every record. Every email. Every timestamp. Every piece of documentation that shows where you were, what you did, and what actually happened. Because emotional denials sound like guilt to people who've already chosen to believe the accusation. But evidence doesn't sound like anything. It just exists. Clear. Dated. Undeniable. Ask for the security footage. Request your work records. Screenshot everything. Save text messages. Build a timeline that doesn't rely on memory or interpretation. And when you present it, don't present it to the people who accused you. Present it to the people who have authority to act. Corporate. Legal. The systems that run on proof instead of popularity. That's how you clear your name. Not by shouting louder. But by showing documentation that speaks for itself. The boutique is thriving now. Better than before the accusations. Better than I thought possible during those weeks when I thought my career was over. We've won awards. Hit record sales. Built a team that people actually want to work for. And I've been promoted. Twice. I'm not just a store manager anymore. I'm a district supervisor. Overseeing 6 locations. Training new managers. Building systems across the region. And every time I train someone new, I tell them about documentation. Not as paranoia. As practice. I tell them to reconcile registers daily. To follow up conversations in writing. To keep records that protect both them and their teams. Because good management isn't just about trust. It's about creating structures that make betrayal harder and truth easier to prove. Some people think that's cynical. I think it's smart. Because I've seen what happens when you don't. I've lived through having my name destroyed by someone I trusted. And I know that without evidence, without footage, without records, I'd still be carrying that reputation. Still be explaining what didn't happen. Still be fighting a narrative I could never fully escape. The footage saved me. Not my character. Not my history. Not people who knew me. The footage. Cold. Impersonal. Undeniable. And that's the lesson. Character matters. But evidence wins. So here's what I want you to take from this. False accusations happen. To good people. To people who don't deserve them. To people who've done nothing wrong except trust the wrong person. And when they happen, your instinct will be to defend yourself. To explain. To appeal to fairness and reason and the truth people should already know about you. Resist that instinct. Because emotional defense looks like desperation. And desperation looks like guilt. Instead, document. Calmly. Thoroughly. Systematically. Pull every record that shows what actually happened. Request every piece of footage, every log, every timestamp that proves your version of events. And then present it. Not to the person who accused you. Not to the people who believed them. But to the people with authority to correct the record. Corporate. Legal. The systems that operate on evidence instead of emotion. Gabrielle told everyone I was lying. She made it specific. Detailed. Convincing. And for weeks, people believed her. Because her story was emotional. And emotion is persuasive. But the security footage was factual. And facts, when undeniable, are final. That's the power of documentation. It doesn't argue. Doesn't persuade. Doesn't appeal. It just exists. And existence, in the face of lies, is enough. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been falsely accused, if someone has tried to destroy your reputation with lies, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've faced something similar. Because these stories matter. Not just as warnings, but as proof that you can survive false accusations. That documentation works. That the truth, when backed by evidence, outlasts lies. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories about reputation destroyed and rebuilt. About false accusations and undeniable proof. About what happens when the accused stop defending and start documenting. Because the world is full of people who lie. Who weaponize accusations. Who destroy reputations without evidence. But it's also full of security footage. Transaction logs. Timestamps. Records that don't care about emotion or narrative. Just facts. Gabrielle told everyone I was lying. The security footage proved her wrong. And in the end, the footage was all that mattered.